That's right, and that's the reason why it is important that there should be some reform of the law. And there are a lot of areas that call for reform, including the registration requirement. And I'm going to do some comparison between the part 2 of the Act and then part 1 and part 3. The part 1 deals with the customary marriages.
Ghana, wannan tasha na Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwarku. Tasha ne da ke wasar da lamukan musulunci a cikin faɗin Ghana baki ɗaya. Shi yasa za ku iya turo tallace-tallacen hajojinku domin samun ingancin talla da sauki. Sannan kuma za ku same shi a farashi mai rahusa. Shi yasa ku turo tallace-tallacen ku saboda taimakawa a musulunci. Za ku iya kira wannan lamba da ke kan talabijin. Guidance TV. Haske a cikin rayuwanka.
So and shining light into my deep in those eyes, can't you see him in disguise, reaching out to the heart that's in you and I, and every tear that is wet. Every tear that is when he is there.
Guidance TV, the light in your life.
Deep in those eyes, can't you see him in disguise, reaching out to the heart that's in you and I, and every tear that is wet, he is there. Every tear that is when he is there.
Guidance TV, the light in your life.
Al'umman Ghana, wannan tasha na Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwarku. Tasha ne da ke wasar da lamukan musulunci a cikin faɗin Ghana baki ɗaya. Shi yasa za ku iya turo tallace-tallacen hajojinku domin samun ingancin talla da sauki. Sannan kuma za ku same shi a farashi mai rahusa. Shi yasa ku turo tallace-tallacen ku saboda taimakawa a musulunci. Za ku iya kira wannan lamba da ke kan talabijin. Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwanka.
So and shining light into my
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Viewers, welcome once again to your only source of Islamic information, current affairs show, Islam and the Law. My name is Abdul Fattah Bawa Yusuf, and today we are going to look at the Islamic marriage in Ghana. How feasible, how accessible, how reliable, documentation-wise. Inshallah, I believe you to sit back, you enjoy the show as we going to have a very wonderful discussion where we have a very competent and knowledgeable person to really elaborate on what we have in the current state of the law and what we need to do to make it easy for us. Today our guest is His Worship Abdul-Baqi Abdullah, who is a magistrate. He's our guest for today. You're welcome.
Thank you.
MashaAllah. How is it?
Oh, alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah. So what can you tell us basically with regards to the laws of Ghana today and Islamic marriage? When you say Islamic marriage in the first place, what do you mean?
Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillah. When we talk about Islamic marriage, in my view, it has to be looked at from two perspectives. From the perspective of the Ummah, the Muslim Ummah, and from the perspective of the law, that is the laws of Ghana. Now, as far as the perspective of the Muslim Ummah is concerned, Islamic marriage is a marriage that is conducted and solemnized in accordance with the Sharia, what is generally known as the nikah. If it is conducted and solemnized in accordance with the dictates of Sharia law, then it is Islamic marriage. And this is what we have commonly in our Muslim communities. But then, when it comes to the laws of Ghana, that is from the perspective of the laws of Ghana.
So in this case, you say the Mohammedan law.
That is it. The laws of Ghana, not Mohammedan law.
Okay.
The laws of Ghana.
Yeah, okay.
We have the Marriages Act, and the Marriages Act, what is described in it as Mohammedan marriage, is different from what we have, because as far as the laws of Ghana is concerned, Islamic marriage, or what is referred in it as Mohammedan marriage, is marriage that is conducted in accordance with Islamic Sharia law and registered in accordance with the Act. And the validity of marriage is dependent on its registration
In Ghana.
in Ghana. And so marriage that is conducted in accordance with Islamic marriage before a licensed Islamic priest, or what in the law is referred to as Mohammedan priest, and then registered. That is what
So
is
the priest
Islamic
we refer
marriage.
to as Imam.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the priest that we refer to as Imam in the law is referred to as Mohammedan priest. I have to say that a lot of Muslims, and I say Muslims generally, consider that description Mohammedan as objectionable.
Yeah.
And I think for good reason it is objectionable. But these are laws that is of colonial origin. I think the law was in 1951. It is an old law.
Maybe if you can help us, why Mohammedan?
Well,
And not Muslims.
as I said, the law was enacted.
Okay.
It's a colonial law, a British colonial law, and that has been with us today. There has been some changes here and there, but in its original form, it is colonial. It was Cap 129 of 1951, and so Muslims consider this objectionable, because if you look at the description Muhammadan, yes, it's as if Muslims worship the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but that is not the case. We have the Buddhists who worship Buddha, and we have the Christians who worship Christ, and so it gives the wrong impression that Muhammadans also worship Muhammad, and every Muslim know that assigning partners with Allah is the highest of transgression, and that is why it is considered objectionable. But as far as the law is concerned, presently, it is no longer described as Mohammedan marriage, although in the law itself you see the description Mohammedan here and there, but the law was consolidated. The laws regarding marriage and divorce, customary marriage, the ordinance marriage, and what was then known as Mohammedan marriage were all consolidated, and they are now described as the Marriages Act. And so what was described as then as Mohammedan marriage is now part 2 of the Marriages Act. And under that part, registration is a condition precedent for validity. And if the marriage is not registered, then it is not valid. Yes, it is void. Yes. But as I said, from the Muslim perspective, the community perspective, what we do, we normally have it in our invitation cards, Islamic marriage. Invitation to Islamic marriage. But strictly speaking, as far as the laws of Ghana is concerned, unless it is registered in accordance with the dictates of the law, it is not Islamic marriage and it is not valid. Yes.
So in that case, why do you think, or is that the reason why you have a chunk of majority, should I put it, especially those who travel, rather go for the customary marriage, as in terms of registration?
I think that as far as in my experience, rather shows that majority opt for the ordinance, which was previously Cap 127, and now Part 3 of the Marriages Act. It is described now as Christian and other marriages in Part 3, which is a monogamous, strictly monogamous marriage. Those who wish to travel rather opt for that one, because especially those who want to travel to the Western world, because it conforms with their notion of marriage, that is the monogamous marriage. That part conforms with that. But that is one reason why the registration under the Muhammadan, under Part 2 of the Marriages Act is not popular or common among Muslims. But there are other challenges. The other reasons why it is not registration, the Part 2, Muslims don't normally come under it, is that the registration requirement is quite cumbersome and complicated. For instance, under the law, registration has to be done within 1 week of solemnization, within 1 week. And if it is not done within 1 week, then the marriage is void. The marriage is void. In fact, in one case, a decided case that came before the courts, the marriage was conducted and then the registration was done 25 days after solemnization. The court held that the marriage was void. And so you see the consequences of non-registration is quite severe. Then also the licensing requirement of the priest, what is described in the act as the Muhammadan priest. It is not any imam who, yes, it doesn't matter how knowledgeable you are, you have to be licensed by the Minister for Interior for you to qualify to register. So any imam or anyone who conducts the marriage, other than a licensed priest or imam who is licensed, duly licensed by the Minister for Interior, the marriage is not valid. Because as part of the registration requirement, the signature of the imam or the Muhammadan priest is a requirement that cannot be dispensed with. And so if the person is not registered, there is not a license, then they cannot do this. And so this is a major challenge. And then also even the registration process itself, because the custodians of the register, as the law appoints the district chief executives of the various districts as the registrars of the marriages, the Muhammadan marriage. So you celebrate before the licensed priest, then you appear before the district chief executive, who is the registrar, to register. But statistics show that the majority, if not all, of the district, municipal and metropolitan assemblies do not have the register for these peoples. And so there are the challenges. These are the reasons why.
I don't think, as you said, if that is an issue, today we are blessed with brains, legal people, qualified Muslims, various stages. Why don't you think it's time? It's high time we look at it.
Yes.
So if you can even assign a lawyer or somebody who is with Islamic background at the various districts to do that much better than the chief executive, who might not be a Muslim, who might not even appreciate some of the...
That's right. And that's the reason why it is important that there should be some reform of the law. And there are a lot of areas that call for reform, including the registration requirement. And I'm going to do some comparison between the part 2 of the Act and then part 1 and part 3. The part 1 deals with the customary marriages. If you look at the customary marriages, it was previously the marriages and divorce registration law. It is also a PNDC law, which is PNDC law 112. There was a requirement for registration. Previously, in this original form, PNDC law 112 made it mandatory and a condition precedent for the validity of any customary marriage. In fact, it was an offense for a person to conduct a customary marriage. If a person who conducted a customary marriage failed to register it, the person committed an offense and was punishable for even a imprisonment or a fine. However, in 1991, there was an amendment to the law. Even in this original form, the registration requirement was, the period for registration was 3 months. From the date of celebration, the couple had 3 months within which to register. But even there, the lawmakers saw that there was a defect in the law, making registration as a condition precedent for validity. So in 1991, the law was amended. And so it was no longer a mandatory requirement for registration. You could marry, it is valid, and you could register at any time. At any time. That is what the law it is now. It is no longer, registration serves evidential purpose only. It is not a requirement for validity. But then when it comes to the Muhammadan marriage, what is called the Muhammadan marriage or the Islamic marriage, registration is a condition precedent for validity. And the consequences for failure to register is dire. It is not that the marriage is not regular, it is void. If you fail to register, then the marriage is void. And the effect of void marriage is void ab initio, void right from the beginning, meaning there is no marriage. And so anything that is done under such a void marriage is of no effect. And so what it means is that upon the death of any of the couples, any of the parties to the marriage, intestate, it becomes a problem. The person cannot inherit under the intestate succession regime. And so that is the challenge. But having said this, I do not want people to despair and say, okay, because I have not registered my marriage, then it is void. If you are to project it as Muhammadan marriage, that is when it is void, as far as Muhammadan. But then, if you are to come under customary law, and so what it means is that what we have in our Muslim communities and call it Islamic marriage is in fact customary marriage under the law.
MashaAllah. So if you just join us, this is Islam and the law, and we're discussing Islamic marriage in Ghana. Inshallah, we're going for a short break. When we come back, then the show continues.
املأ قلبي قرآن واسق حياتي قرآن.
Al'umman Ghana, wannan tasha na Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwarku. Tasha ne da ke wasar da lamukan musulunci a cikin faɗin Ghana baki ɗaya. Shi yasa za ku iya turo tallace-tallacen hajojinku domin samun ingancin talla da sauki. Sannan kuma za ku same shi a farashi mai rahusa. Shi yasa ku turo tallace-tallacen ku saboda taimakawa a musulunci. Za ku iya kiran wannan lamba da ke kan talabijin. Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwanka.
And shining light into my
Al'umman Ghana, wannan tasha na Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwarku. Tasha ne da ke wasar da lamukan musulunci a cikin faɗin Ghana baki ɗaya. Shi yasa za ku iya turo tallace-tallacen hajojinku domin samun ingancin talla da sauki, sannan kuma za ku same shi a farashi mai rahusa. Shi yasa ku turo tallace-tallacen ku saboda taimakawa a musulunci. Za ku iya kira wannan lamba da ke kan talabishin. Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwanka.
So and shining light into my
Achọmi Jimaima kemgbe ahụ n'ihe mọkọla ni hunu shamini nteshia iya PROG Guidance TV ayu onungbo yue mo ni won no ni shaji omo mi ewo bo unkefe ekwamo Guidance TV ni bo wo na nyungbo yue mo ni chaki omo wala shile mi yemi amen.
Guidance TV, the light in your life.
رحمن رحمن ساعدني يا رحمن اشرح صدري قرآن املأ قلبي قرآن
Welcome back. If you just join us, this is Islam and the Law, the show that is going to be comprehensive in terms of the legal or the laws of Ghana and how we as Muslims can also operate and live conducively with these particular laws. And today we are looking at Islamic marriage. And inshallah, our guest for today is His Worship Abdul-Baqi Abdullah, who is a magistrate. Yes, as you just indicated, you are saying that we need to have a reform. A reform in which way? Where are we going to start from? Some are saying, why don't you look at holistically how the Quran has captured marriage and it didn't deal with it like other scriptures, but holistically?
Yes. If you look at the current regime, I've pointed out some defects. Okay. Which includes the registration requirement, the shortness of the period, and then even the requirement for registration, licensing of the imam or the priest, and also there are some other defects. Now, if we are going to look at by way of reform, I would say that we probably have to look at the changes that were made to the customary marriage registration, that is the marriages and divorce registration law, PNDC law 112, and then we emulate that example, we replicate that example in respect of Mohammedan marriages or Islamic marriages. Because, as I said earlier, there was a registration requirement that was made condition precedent for validity. But that had been amended, and the period for registration was made open, so the parties can register at any time. And I think that reform that has to be introduced. The 1 week period has to be scrapped, and then it should be made open. At any time, the parties can register. And also, as for the licensing requirement, perhaps it is positive. It is because without a licensing requirement, the law thrives on authenticity. And so if we have to have any person officiating and solemnizing marriages, well, it will be problematic. And so the licensing requirement perhaps is good. But then the requirement that the licensing has to be done by the Minister for Interior may make it very difficult for, it could be made possible for the district chief executives to, or the secretariat of the national chief imam to be authorized to issue the licenses, because nobody can determine who is more competent to solemnize Islamic marriages than the authorities of Islam, the Muslim authorities in Ghana. And so perhaps authority should be given to the national chief imam to issue the licenses to the imams to officiate. Now, the other areas of reform that I will also talk of is the fact that, you see, under the old law, there was something that was positive. In section 10 of the old law, that is cap 129, before the consolidation, and in particular before the enactment of PNDC law 111, that is the Interstate Succession Act. In section 10, there was a provision to the effect that Muslims who conduct and solemnize their marriages in accordance with that act, that is cap 129, upon their death, succession to their property will be in accordance with Islamic Sharia. That was what was provided in the act. You see, however, in 1985, following the enactment of PNDC law 111, that provision was repealed. And all matters of succession, intestate succession, are now regulated by PNDC law 111. You see, yes. And so, in my view, this is a positive thing. The old regime, which made it possible for succession to be under Sharia, that is in respect of persons who registered their marriages in accordance with that law, probably should be reintroduced. So that anybody who registered their marriage in accordance with Part 2 of the Marriages Act, the succession to their property, particularly intestate succession, should be in accordance with Islamic Sharia. I think that is another area of reform that has to be introduced. Now, in fact, when we even talk about the registration requirement, there is an opportunity for extension of time. Although the 1 week period, if you fail to register within 1 week, it is void. There is an opportunity for extension of time. But even that opportunity to be able to activate that opportunity, the procedure itself is also very cumbersome. It requires filing a motion, originating motion, before the High Court, you see, supported by an affidavit, stating the reason why you are not being able to register within 1 week. And if the High Court is satisfied with your application, they may grant an extension of time. And so you can imagine the very cumbersome procedure. And so all these requirements should be scrapped. I think they should be made open. The parties should be able to register their marriages at any time that they please. So that the registration should not be made a condition precedent for the validity of the marriage.
So what do you say with regards to those who might not know what the Quran says, that whoever chooses any other law against the Quran, like the person is not really, in terms of the faith of the person becomes questionable. And yet you find people going to the courts, and sometimes, as you said initially, some of the courts will refer them back to the office of National Chief Imam or some of our imams to resolve their intestate in terms of inheritance.
Well, as far as inheritance is concerned, presently, irrespective of the religious denomination or background of the intestate or the beneficiaries of the intestate, and irrespective of their ethnic background or customary background, the law that regulates intestate succession at present is the Interstate Succession Act, PNDC law 111. That is the law generally. And so if nobody can come under the Sharia law at the moment. The only circumstance under which the Sharia, in my view, the Sharia may apply to interstate succession is where all the persons entitled to benefit under the intestate succession agree that we will want this, the devolution of the estate to be by Sharia, to be in accordance with Sharia. However, if any of the beneficiaries, the persons, object that, look, I do not want this to be in accordance with Sharia, how will the dispute be resolved? Eventually, if they are not able to resolve it amicably, it has to end up in court. And the only law that the courts apply in the determination of intestate succession is the PROG law 111. If we want to avoid that, the only way we have to do is through legislation. It's through legislation. And that is why I am saying that the old regime, as it was before 1985, by which Section 10 provided that upon the death of Mohammedans who have registered their marriages in accordance with the Act, upon their death, succession to their property should be in accordance with Sharia. Probably we have to reintroduce it into the new Act. It has to be reintroduced. And it is a simple matter of amending PNDC law 111 to exclude marriages that are conducted in accordance with Part 2 of the Marriages Act. So that, and I think that is perhaps the most attractive aspect, the aspect of the law that is most attractive. And I believe that a lot of Muslims will take advantage of it if this aspect is actually introduced. Because many Muslims will want their succession to their estate, particularly if they die intestate, to be done in accordance with the Islamic Sharia. And their wishes cannot be carried into effect with the current laws that we have.
So what is your view with regards to those who also claim that some of our imams are not qualified in terms of the distribution of the intestate? That is why some of them seek to the court for redress, because even the Prophet ﷺ, before his death, he, in fact, most of the hadiths that came was saying that one of the difficult, or one of the things that he calls for is for people who would be knowledgeable in terms of taking care of intestines when it comes to the dispute. Because the distribution is not that simple as people think it is.
Yes.
Especially when you get people who are more wealthy, who are more, it becomes a bit.
Yes, I agree that, I mean, distribution of the estate of a deceased person, particularly a deceased who dies intestate, is a very complex endeavor. It's a matter that is not to be taken so lightly at all. However,
the person might want it Islamically, but then who will do that according to?
Yes, it is not about the competence.
Okay.
The problem is not about the competence. The problem is about the lawful way of doing it. You see? And so, because, like I said earlier, if all the persons entitled to benefit under the law, they all agree that, well, we agree that the estate should be distributed, the properties should be distributed in accordance with Sharia. I believe there are a lot of competent Muslims and imams who would do justice to the matter in accordance with Sharia. And so, but the question is, if there is a dispute and that dispute ends up in court, how is that dispute going to be resolved? And that is where I'm talking about the applicable law. And at the moment, Section 1 of the Act, PNDC Law 111, is clear. Irrespective of the religious background, irrespective of the ethnic background, the ethnicity of the intestate, whether the person is of matrimonial society or matrilineal society or patrilineal society, whether the person is of northern extraction or southern extraction, whether they are Muslim or Christians, it doesn't matter. So long as the person died intestate and the matter is to be resolved in court, the applicable law is PNDC Law 111. You see, and so if the parties are not in agreement as to how the property should be resolved. They go before the imam distributes it, they are not happy. Then eventually it may end up in court. And the only law that is applicable is PNDC law 111.
And you think that the court can also do justice to?
Yes. The law, irrespective of its defect, it contains detailed provisions.
Because I was told by a legal practitioner that sometimes the courts do invite some of our alims or imams who they think can assist or help when it comes to some of these issues. I don't know how to do that.
I have my doubt that a court would do that, because the proportions are clearly spelled out. The proportions are clearly spelled out. For instance, it is provided in it that if the intestate died and then there is a house, the house goes to the surviving spouse and the children, and then the residue is distributed. The household chattel also. The household chattel includes the things that are in the household, the refrigerators, those things. And if there was a car that was used for domestic purposes, not for commercial purposes, they all form part of the household. All of it goes to the spouse and the surviving spouse and the children. Everything else that is left is described as the residue. And there are proportions. 1/8 goes to this. There are clear proportions that are spelled out in the Act. And the court goes in accordance with those proportions. It does not require the invitation. Probably for the purpose of valuation, yes, they may call an expert to come and value the estates for the purpose of valuation in order to determine the proportions. However, the proportions are clearly spelled out in the Act. And because it does not take into account the religious background, there is no basis for inviting any imam to determine the proportions. Yes.
Thanks so much. All too soon, our time is up, but we encourage you to join us on Facebook as you send your comments and some of the concerns you have with regards to Islam and the law. And today we are looking at the Islamic marriage. And our guest who just spoke, he is Worship Abdul-Baki Abdullah, who is a magistrate. So I hope you will bear with me that you have really learned a lot, and personally I have learned. So we encourage you to join us on Facebook as you send your comments on Islam and the law on Facebook, so that we can share the page as well, so that many people can also benefit from this discussion. My name is Abdul Fattah. Stay blessed, stay out of trouble. Until we meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi.
I know I'm waiting for some.
Al'umman Ghana, wannan tasha na Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwarku. Tasha ne da ke wasar da lamukan musulunci a cikin faɗin Ghana baki ɗaya. Shi yasa za ku iya turo tallace-tallacen hajojinku domin samun ingancin talla da sauki, sannan kuma za ku same shi a farashi mai rahusa. Shi yasa ku turo tallace-tallacen ku saboda taimakawa a musulunci. Za ku iya kira wannan lamba da ke kan talabijin. Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwanka.
And shining light into my
Fufne, Mayuman Zakaria Mohammed, so Matia Nilgnera, Madirgo Egban, the Tofu okay, Adina wa follow no, and Angitela, the end of the day, I'm sitting with Guidance TV. The day no Chiborse, Hankangu, Fonda Chave, and Dinara, Dina wa follow no, inshallah, look at me from Fonda,
Guidance TV, the light in your life.
Al'umman Ghana, wannan tasha na Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwarku. Tasha ne da ke wasar da lamukan musulunci a cikin faɗin Ghana baki ɗaya. Shi yasa za ku iya turo tallace-tallacen hajojinku domin samun ingancin talla da sauki. Sannan kuma za ku same shi a farashi mai rahusa. Shi yasa ku turo tallace-tallacen ku saboda taimakawa musulunci. Za ku iya kiran wannan lamba da ke kan talabijin. Guidance TV, haske a cikin rayuwanka.
So and shining light into my.
قل كونوا حجارة أو حديدا أو خلقا مما يكبر في صدوركم فسيقولون من يعيدنا قل الذي فطركم أول مرة فسينغضون إليك رؤوسهم ويقولون متاه وقل عسى أن يكون قريبا يوم يدعوكم فتستجيبون بحمده وتظنون إن لبثتم إلا قليلا وقل لعبادي يقولوا التي هي أحسن إن الشيطان ينزغ بينهم إن الشيطان كان للإنسان عدوا مبينا ربكم أعلم بكم إن يشأ يرحمكم أو إن يشأ يعذبكم وما أرسلناك عليهم وكيلا وربك أعلم بمن في السماوات والأرض ولقد فضلنا بعض النبيين على بعض وآتينا داود زبورا قل ادعوا الذين زعمتم من دونه فلا يملكون كشف الضر عنكم ولا تحويلا أولئك الذين يدعون يبتغون إلى ربهم الوسيلة أيهم أقرب ويرجون رحمته ويخافون عذابه إن عذاب ربك كان محذورا وإن من قرية إلا نحن مهلكوها قبل يوم القيامة أو معذبوها عذابا شديدا كان ذلك في الكتاب مسطورا وما منعنا أن نرسل بالآيات إلا أن كذب بها الأولون وآتينا ثمود الناقة مبصرة فظلموا بها وما نرسل بالآيات إلا تخويفا وإذ قلنا لك إن ربك أحاط بالناس وما جعلنا الرؤيا التي أريناك إلا فتنة للناس والشجرة الملعونة في القرآن ونخوفهم فما يزيدهم إلا طغيانا كبيرا وإذ قلنا للملائكة اسجدوا لآدم فسجدوا إلا إبليس قال أأسجد لمن خلقت طينا قال أرأيتك هذا الذي كرمت علي لئن أخرتني إلى يوم القيامة لأحتنكن ذريته إلا قليلا قال اذهب فمن تبعك منهم فإن جهنم جزاؤكم جزاء موفورا واستفزز من استطعت منهم بصوتك وأجلب عليهم بخيلك ورجلك وشاركهم في الأموال والأولاد وما يعدهم الشيطان إلا غرورا إن عبادي ليس لك عليهم سلطان وكفى بربك وكيلا ربكم الذي يزجي لكم الفلك في البحر لتبتغوا من فضله إنه كان بكم رحيما وإذا مسكم الضر في البحر ضل من تدعون إلا إياه فلما نجاكم إلى البر أعرضتم وكان الإنسان كفورا أفأمنتم أن يخسف بكم جانب البر أو يرسل عليكم حاصبا ثم لا تجدوا لكم وكيلا أم أمنتم أن يعيدكم فيه تارة أخرى فيرسل عليكم قاصفا من الريح فيغرقكم بما كفرتم ثم لا تجدوا لكم علينا به تبيعا ولقد كرمنا بني آدم وحملناهم في البر والبحر ورزقناهم من الطيبات وفضلناهم على كثير ممن خلقنا تفضيلا يوم ندعو كل أناس بإمامهم فمن أوتي كتابه بيمينه فأولئك يقرؤون كتابهم ولا يظلمون فتيلا ومن كان في هذه أعمى فهو في الآخرة أعمى وأضل سبيلا وإن كادوا ليفتنونك عن الذي أوحينا إليك لتفتري علينا غيره وإذا لاتخذوك خليلا ولولا أن ثبتناك لقد كدت تركن إليهم شيئا قليلا إذا لأذقناك ضعف الحياة وضعف الممات ثم لا تجد لك علينا نصيرا وإن كادوا ليستفزونك من الأرض ليخرجوك منها وإذا لا يلبثون خلافك إلا قليلا سنة من قد أرسلنا قبلك من رسلنا ولا تجد لسنتنا تحويلا أقم الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل وقرآن الفجر إن قرآن الفجر كان مشهودا ومن الليل فتهجد به نافلة لك عسى أن يبعثك ربك مقاما محمودا وقل رب أدخلني مدخل صدق وأخرجني مخرج صدق واجعل لي من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا وننزل من القرآن ما هو شفاء ورحمة للمؤمنين ولا يزيد الظالمين إلا خسارا وإذا أنعمنا على الإنسان أعرض ونأى بجانبه وإذا مسه الشر كان يئوسا قل كل يعمل على شاكلته فربكم أعلم بمن هو أهدى سبيلا ويسألونك عن الروح قل الروح من أمر ربي وما أوتيتم من العلم إلا قليلا ولئن شئنا لنذهبن بالذي أوحينا إليك ثم لا تجد لك به علينا وكيلا إلا رحمة من ربك إن فضله كان عليك كبيرا قل لئن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن لا يأتون بمثله ولو كان بعضهم لبعض ظهيرا ولقد صرفنا للناس في هذا القرآن من كل مثل فأبى أكثر الناس إلا كفورا وقالوا لن نؤمن لك حتى تفجر لنا من الأرض ينبوعا أو تكون لك جنة من نخيل وعنب فتفجر الأنهار خلالها تفجيرا أو تسقط السماء كما زعمت علينا كسفا أو تأتي بالله والملائكة قبيلا أو يكون لك بيت من زخرف أو ترقى في السماء ولن نؤمن لرقيك حتى تنزل علينا كتابا نقرأه قل سبحان ربي هل كنت إلا بشرا رسولا وما منع الناس أن يؤمنوا إذ جاءهم الهدى إلا أن قالوا أبعث الله بشرا رسولا قل لو كان في الأرض ملائكة يمشون مطمئنين لنزلنا عليهم من السماء ملكا رسولا قل كفى بالله شهيدا بيني وبينكم إنه كان بعباده خبيرا بصيرا ومن يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد لهم أولياء من دونه ونحشرهم يوم القيامة على وجوههم عميا وبكما وصما مأواهم جهنم كلما خبت زدناهم سعيرا ذلك جزاؤهم بأنهم كفروا بآياتنا وقالوا أئذا كنا عظاما ورفاتا أئنا لمبعوثون خلقا جديدا